Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to CDE Virtual. I have a very interesting guest from Argentina tonight, the Minister of Deregulation and State Transformation in President Javier Milei's administration. He is a global academic, but he has also held important and numerous high-profile positions in government in Argentina. He's former president of the central bank of the country, a national deputy in the Argentine parliament, as well as head of the city of Buenos Aires public bank. Federico, welcome back to South Africa. It's a privilege to have you on our platform. And now that you're in this very important position, thank you for the time.
Hello, Anne. Very nice to talk to you again. My pleasure.
Great. Well, lots to talk about tonight. Let me start in a surprising place for many people. I was interested to learn that Federico has very successfully managed some state-owned institutions, the state-owned energy company, and then the largest city bank, a publicly owned bank in Buenos Aires. And he turned these two institutions around very successfully. What did you learn from running state-owned institutions? And what do you think what are the lessons that you take away from this experience?
Well, and state-owned enterprises are a recipe for disaster. You can have someone which comes in, and I found in the both organizations, but particularly at the Citibank which is a state-owned bank in Buenos Aires, which I run, found a lot of people which were willing to make a transformation and make the bank profitable and honest and hardworking people. But the problem with state-owned enterprises is that the incentives are all fuzzy, they're all uncertain, organizations with not a clear owner, and therefore definitely very prone to corruption. I had a lot of corruption in the bank, which I had to clean up when I got there. But it's like a kind of fighting something that you can't stop, because again, it's large organizations where you don't have an owner. So I think you should avoid, to the extent possible, having state-owned companies. Javier Milei is in a process of privatizing everything that can be done by the private sector. We believe can be better served. And this is spoken from someone who actually made a turnaround in a state-owned company. And perhaps I would like to illustrate it with an example, which I think is very interesting. Argentina is a very broad country, it's very large. It's not, it doesn't have such a large population, so it's sparsely populated. I mean, there's some similarity with South Africa here. And before Javier Milei came to power, there was a regulation which did not allow for satellite internet. So you could not provide the services from internet fed by satellite. I mean, perhaps the most well-known case is Starlink, correct? From Elon Musk, which is South African, by the way. And so the first thing that Milei did was he removed that restriction. Starlink, as well as other companies which provide internet from satellite, immediately started operating in Argentina. And today everybody has internet coverage across the country, because that it doesn't depend where you are, you can get the service. Now, why do I relate this to the state-owned company? Because in the 15 years prior to this change, Argentina decided to finance a state-owned company called ARSAT, which is Argentine Satellite Communications, which was basically the company which was in charge of deploying fiber optics across the country. The government probably spent around $7 billion in this company over the 15 years. And with just a simple deregulation, that capital became obsolete, because for people it's much easier and more efficient to just connect to the satellite than to connect to this state-owned run infrastructure. So also in a world which is changing, where technology is changing so much, you risk with a state-owned company the possibility of actually investing very large sums of money in something that then becomes absolutely obsolete. So that definitely, I think that's something that you should shy away from. We've discussed we're moving our railroad structure to an open access railroad structure where basically there's going to be free competition, and whoever is going on the tracks is as it is in a road, correct, is going to be totally free. It's going to be private sector. And anyway, so I'm very skeptical about the possibility of state-owned companies becoming efficient, and I think there's very risk. You risk investing lots of money in things which turn out not to be very useful for society.
Interesting point. When the current president took office in 2023,
Yeah.
what did he inherit? Give us a feel of the challenges facing Argentina at the time.
Well, he inherited an economy running into hyperinflation. Wholesale prices in December, which is the month he took over, were increasing at a rate of 50%, which is a 17,000 annual inflation rate if you annualize that 50%. A large fiscal deficit. But perhaps I would say the thing that I think more describes for me the state of the public opinion was the fact that in the previous 10 years, 2 million Argentines had left the country. No, and basically it was the people who were leaving the country because they thought there was no hope in the country were of all social statements in the society. I mean, the sons and daughters of the poor were leaving, the sons and daughters of the middle class, the sons and daughters of the rich, they were all leaving. I think Argentines realized that if Argentina didn't go for a dramatic change, we were going to all age watching our grandchildren over Zoom. Okay, and I mean, I think one of the most important things you want in life is to have your family close and to have people feel that it's your country, which provides the opportunities for them to grow and develop fully their personality. So now the problem in Argentina was a persistent inability of the state to have its accounts in order. So the economy systematically the government systematically was spending more than its income. At some points, it was financing that with debt, and eventually we run into this kind of debt default episodes and debt restructurings, which were very traumatic for the economy and for the system. Or they were being financed with money printing, which generated inflation. And President Milei he said to the population, this has to change dramatically, and we're going to change it. And then kind of something that was kind of almost magical happened, no? Which is that he really, this outsider from the political system, not constrained by interest, really with this obsessive view that you need to have a stable macroeconomic order for the economy to thrive, that you have to reduce the weight of the state, because everything that the state spends is something that you have to charge the citizens. Every dollar, every rand, every peso that a state spends is a rand or a dollar that you have to charge citizens to finance that. Okay, so it's kind of a deadweight loss, because it's true that the government spends, but then people cannot spend because people are handing their money to the government. So he said, we're going to reduce this. And this is kind of perhaps the most amazing thing, that in 1 month, he cut government expenditure by 5 percentage points of GDP.
Oh.
So he cut all the transfers to the provinces, which had really kind of bloated their spending dramatically over the previous 15 years. He cut all public works, because most of public works were provincial and municipal things that should be done at that level of government, not at the level of the national government. There's very little in terms of infrastructure, which is at the national level. And we fired 40,000 public employees. We reduced the wages of public servants. The increase in inflation also reduced, because of the way pensions were adjusted, also reduced a combination of things we had a 5% adjustment in GDP. Then the government sustained that in the 2024 with a fiscal surplus. And one of the 5 countries in the world which has a surplus. So this kind of bad student forever suddenly got a good grade for 1 year. And I mean, and listen, the president is absolutely obsessive that this is the core, the key of its economic program. Once the government achieved the fiscal surplus, it stopped printing money to finance. We were not a country which had access to debt, so we were printing everything with money, so filling the hole with money, and so inflation really dropped, so that I mentioned a 54% rate of inflation in the wholesale price index, and now it's down to 1.5 monthly. So it was a dramatic reduction. But not only the reduction in inflation worked wonders in 2 other dimensions. The first one is that the economy grew 5%. So if you take the level of activity December of 2024 and you compare it with the level of activity of December 2023 when Javier Milei got into office, the economy grew 5%. So there was all these fears that the fiscal adjustment was going to generate a recession. It was all on the contrary, because the reduction in government expenditure basically empowered the private sector, return to the private sector that spending capability, that private sector spend that money, that led in a more efficient way, that led to an increase in government expenditure. But the most amazing thing is because when you reduce government expenditure, which we call it the change, so I'm sure we'll talk more about this, Anne. But when we apply the change on government expenditure, the most important tax that we reduced was the inflation tax, as I mentioned. And the inflation tax is a machine of making poor people. I mean, it's a poverty machine. So the poverty rates had reached 57% in the transition from the previous government. So it was a dramatic situation for Argentina, and that poverty rate has fallen to 33%. So in this first year, 10 million people have been moved away from poverty in Argentina. And as a result of the change, so as a result of the reduction in government expenditure. So that's a little bit what we inherited and what happened during this first year. I think these are the most important things to mention.
Wow, it's quite an achievement. I'm going to dig deeper
Yeah.
on a
Well,
lot
you
of
need to have the courage, because
yeah, it's courage.
I think well, sorry, I'll let you ask.
No. So I'm going to come to some of all the aspects that you've mentioned. Let me start first with, I understand one of his first actions was to halve the cabinet from 16 posts to 8. Why did he do that, and how did he do that?
Well, he tends to think that, the government has kind of really grown itself too much in terms of political positions. So we cut 30% the political positions in the first year. The process is continuing, okay? So part of that was to cut the ministries down from 18 to 8. What I can tell you as being a minister in the cabinet is that we are a small cabinet. So the meetings are flow very easily because it's not kind of a room full of people. We all think very much alike. The president is very clear about his 2 main messages. No, his main one message is fiscal surplus achieved through a reduction in government expenditure, because he doesn't believe, and we in general don't believe, that the government has much to do. I mean, we can discuss the scope of government, but trust me, I mean, I can give you tons of examples of things that the government does that is just a burden on people with no real payback. And so fiscal surplus is his first idea, to be achieved, as I mentioned, with the reduction in government. And the second is economic freedom, which is the deregulation, no? And so it's chainsaw and deregulation. And because it's so clear that these are the driving ideas of this government, it's a cabinet that it's very easy to work with, okay? And one exercise that we did, I'm sure you're going to find this interesting, is because in the first year, we cut this 40,000 employees, we cut 30% of the structure. We did kind of the basic things, which were kind of obvious. You have to do them, no? You have to have the courage to do them, but they were pretty obvious, not that it. So then I asked the president that we spend one cabinet meeting to discuss in a little bit more abstract, what should a libertarian government do? What do we think a libertarian government, a government that believes in a small state, that believes in economic freedom, what are the things the government should do and should not do? So it's a national defense it should do. If you have social aid programs, which are universal, like for example, we have a transfer to the children, which is universal, that we can do. But you say, giving credit, no, because you have the financial sector for that. If it's something that really corresponds to a province or a municipality, then the government should not do it. If it's something that the private sector could do it, then we should not do it. So we did a list of the things that the government should do and a list of the things that the government should not do. And now the second year, we're doing what we call the chainsaw 2.0 or deep chainsaw, okay? And the deep chainsaw is that we go to the government and we ask people, what do you do? And we check if they're on the yes or they're on the nose. And if they're on the nose, basically the area is shut down and closed. And that's the way we're kind of trimming down the government. And, we're doing this because the more we can reduce government expenditure, the more we can reduce taxes. So the government is basically, the president has, I already mentioned that the big tax that was reduced last year was the inflation tax, but there were many other taxes that were reduced. So the president says, I cannot reduce taxes if I don't reduce expenditure, because if I reduce taxes without reducing expenditure, I'm back to a deficit, okay? And this is the problem. So guys, you have to reduce the expenditure, and then that will open the room for further reductions in taxation. So that's a little bit what we're doing right now. And I think that's very much helped by this small cabinet, homogeneous and okay. Look,
Right.
Javier also has no problem if a minister makes a mistake. He beheads you, okay, very quickly. So, so again, that also keeps us all pretty much disciplined beneath these two kind of main ideas.
So let me push back a little bit. And for many South Africans, after centuries of discrimination, they would argue that you need a state to help the poor, and that the market, which you're in favor of, generally tends to help poorer people, rich people, rather than poorer people. But libertarians, well, the sort of Argentine libertarians that this real life case study you're arguing something different. You're saying that the state is almost the wrong place to look for social progress. How do you deal with this question about the poor and the state, and that markets tend to favor the better off, the status quo? How would you respond to that?
Okay, let me start by how I see the role of the market and then the role of the state, because we may think that the state has a role to play, but then how does the state plays that role? I mean, is the cure worse than the sickness? Okay, so let's analyze those two things differently. I'll tell you as following. I think regulation is it makes it impossible for small and medium-sized firms to operate. It's something which kills entrepreneurship. It kills the small business, because you put these hurdles, which maybe for a large company, I mean, South Africa has fantastic large corporations. They can kind of go, they have their lawyers, they can do it. They go over the hurdle and they can operate, okay, in this maze of regulations. But the small firm it basically cannot do it. So it has to be informal. It has to go to informality. And then if you're informal, you cannot grow, and then that's it, okay? That's the end of the story. So I think deregulation is above and beyond a pro-small firm. It's a pro-individual, it's pro-entrepreneurship. And that's why it's so important. Also, the deregulation is an anti-corruption policy, because each regulation is the opportunity for a bribe. And I think South Africa on this must be kind of similar to Argentina. Okay, so any regulation is an opportunity for some government official to say, "Oh, I'll fix this problem." Okay, and I remember that once an Angolian student of mine at Harvard, he said that they had a president, he said that the issue is to create obstacles in order to then be able to provide solutions. Okay, so create okay, so we want to get rid of we get rid.
Sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, I assume you're in favor of some regulation, health and safety, for example, or not?
No, yes, we're not at all dogmatic. For example, when you have common resources, you have to have a regulation and how to exploit that. You have monopolies. I mean, we have we're not at all dogmatic in this regard. Okay, I mean, we are, but also market failures are not a kind of a blank check to do regulation. I always give the example that the most important paper in market failures, which is a paper by George Akerlof in 1971 called The Market for Lemons in the American Economic Review, which is the paper where he introduced the concept of asymmetric information. How does a market operate when there's asymmetric information? And the example he used to give was when you sell a car. The people who sells the car knows more about the car than the person who's buying the car. And typically, if a car is a problem, it's more likely to be in the market. If the buyer cannot see that, so it has to anticipate that the car is lousy, so it's going to pay less for the car. But if it pays less for the car, then only the lousy cars go into the market, because you're not going to sell a good car for a low price, and then the market collapses. Okay. And so that's a very famous paper. He got the Nobel Prize for that. But the used car market in the US is not regulated. So it means that the fact that you have that asymmetric information doesn't mean that the solution necessarily is a regulation. But we're not dogmatic at all in that. Let me tell you about the state, and I'll tell you with an example. No, for example, in the Ministry of Human Capital, where President Milei combined education, the labor ministry, and the social aid ministry, etc., called the Ministry of Human Capital. There was, for example, a program which the previous government had instituted, which is to give microloans, small loans to entrepreneurs. Okay. So we look at this program. There was about 100 people running the program. Imagine that giving a micro loan, a loan for, say, $100 is something very difficult to manage, okay, very costly to manage. And they wanted to build this thing, this asset base of loans. And today, the loans were 0.15% of all the money that had been put into the program. 0.15%. That's the stock of loans. So that means that 99.85% of the money, where did that go? It went to the bureaucracy. It went to social organizations, which are intermediary. It went to the political friends in municipalities, which are getting the money and keeping it. So you say, okay, the Argentines have been paying millions and millions of dollars in building this thing that all went to basically to different, and what did it have? It had nothing, So this is why I'm saying, now, so for example, we focus all our social aid in a specific direct transfers to people. We have kids. And kids have to kind of have a certain amount of vaccination. They have to go to school. It's a universal program. The government has strengthened that program, and has really focused on the spending, which is from the beneficiaries were the politicians and the political class and the bureaucracy, and which was not. This is why something interesting. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but this is what has made Milei so popular. So the fiscal adjustment is very popular because he has not touched social aid. I'm going to tell you something else, which is amazing. For the last 20 years, whoever came, of the people who are listening to us, if they came to Argentina, you would have something which were roadblocks. So you came to Buenos Aires, there were people protesting in the street. The total society was a total chaos. And that happened because the social aid was not given to people, what was given to some intermediary organizations. So these intermediate organizations got the money, then they distributed to the people. They typically kind of took a cut of 30-40% of the money. But the worst thing is they basically asked people 5 days a month, that's basically the standard obligation, to come and protest against the government so that they could get more money, to justify they get more money. But it was all paid by the government, you see, it was all paid by the taxpayer. The government was paying the protest against the government, okay? Now, this system has been going on for 20 years. Everybody knew it, but nobody dared cut this system, okay? And then Javier Milei, in his first weeks, he said the money is going to go directly to people. He took these intermediaries off scene, and these roadblocks disappeared. And it's considered one of the most amazing successes of Milei, because we've been living with this for 20 years, and it was just, and the government was financing this, okay? And the social aid money was being funneled. So imagine, so people, instead of having to pay 30% to these intermediaries, got the full amount. Then the president increased the amount on top of that. And then people had to spend 5 days a week with their kids coming to the city to protest against the government, okay? Almost like slave labor, correct? Okay, and that all went away. People get their money, they get it in full. They don't have to do anything. They live their lives. Well, so anyway, so I think there are an interesting stories to tell.
That's great. I'm going to come back to the politics of this in a moment, but let's get to the heart of deregulation. You know, lots of people in South Africa talk about getting rid of red tape, but we seem to do more talking than actually doing it. So I'm really interested to talk about, let's call it the why you've been deregulating as much as you have, which you've covered a bit, but then also the how you did it.
The how is the interesting question,
okay,
because
let's get to the how.
The how. I say I'm the plumber of the regulation. Okay, so the plumber comes and fixes the thing. Okay, so how do you become the plumber of the regulation? So we started working 2 years before Milei came to power, and we did a review of all the legislation of Argentina. So we reviewed all the laws of Argentina, and we classified them between laws that were okay, laws that had to be eliminated altogether, and laws that had to be changed, and then we had to change. Now, how 7 people, no budget zero, okay? So how do 7 people, it was 5 lawyers and 2 economists, in 2 years, provide a comprehensive review of the whole legal system of Argentina, okay? So, of course, there were people who were asking us that they wanted to help and they wanted to participate in the process. So they said they would say, Federico, do you want we can have a meeting so I'll explain to you what has to be done. I said, no, I don't do meetings. Okay, do you want me to send you a paper? I have a paper where I describe the diagnosis of what has to be done. I don't read papers. You don't do meetings, you don't read papers. No, well, I'll send you some bullets with the main points. I don't read bullets. So people say, what do you want? I said, no. I said, I'll give you an example. Environmental laws. We have 40 environmental laws. So I get some person, okay, we have what's a law which has a problem? So the glaciers law, okay? So for example, in the Andes, we have glaciers, and there's a law which protects the glaciers, which is totally fine. But then it defines a surrounding area of the glaciers, and that surrounding area is not very well defined. And therefore, you don't know if you can do, for example, mining there or not, what are the conditions. It's very it generates so much uncertainty that there are no investments there, okay? So, okay, we need to change the glaciers law, okay? So I tell the guy, you download the glaciers law from the web, put it in a Word file, and then you start editing, okay? And you do the changes with track changes, please, because if not, I don't know what you did. And you send that to me, okay? Because what I need is the paper. I need the execution of the change, okay? Obviously, I was talking to people who somehow ideologically had a view which was similar to ours, but then how do I need to change Article 3 of the glaciers law? And this has to be the writing, the blah, blah, blah. And, sitting together to have a nice conversation about about the glaciers, I'm not going to move my agenda forward. So I didn't accept any of that. Now, the interesting thing is when I got to that point in the conversation, 70% of the people disappeared. For several reasons. Perhaps they could do it, but they were not willing to do it. I mean, they said, I'm happy to give you, Federico, my ideas, but I'm not happy to work 2 months for you free to do this, or they had other obligations, or some people said, well, some people maybe didn't know how to do it, okay? Because it's easy to come and speak big things about how the world should be. But then when you say, how do I change the world? Or some people were afraid, some people respect the laws and said, oh, I can't dare to change the law. Anyway, so, but with the 30% of the people who took the challenge and took me up on the challenge and did the change, and I liked what they did. And I said, oh, the glacial law, now why don't you take a look at the water law? And why do you take at the air law? And that's the way I kind of, in 2 years, having spent zero money, I was able to reach the government with the whole thing done. Okay, now, that's the laws. Then you have the decrees, okay? And then you have the resolution, so it's a big thing. Now, which is my methodology to what should I look at now, okay? Of course, this exercise idea of the laws provides a lot of hints, correct, as to where the problems are. So I have that comprehensive view. Then I also have, of course, I listen to the business community, and they tell me what things bothers them. I don't take meetings either. I said, no, a meeting just to get to know each other and do kind of therapy. I'm not interested in doing that, okay? So you just send me what are the things that are bothering you. I'll analyze them, and eventually we may have a meeting if I need some questions about that. It's very, very practical, okay? Then the other thing I did, 2 more things. The other thing I did was I opened up a website in the ministry, which is Report Your Bureaucracy. I asked people to send me, which are impossible not to tell because they're amazing. So people say, look, this is it. For example, a guy who's exporter of watermelons, and the government forced them to package the watermelon in a way that was not accepted by their clients abroad. So the guy had to package the watermelons when poured.
We've got a big storm. Sorry, Federico, you've frozen. Sorry, we're up to the watermelons. Man,
okay, I'm back. I'm back.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Yes,
okay. No, I'm saying the guy, I don't know how, the watermelon guy, the government was forcing him to package the watermelon in a specific way, which is not what the client abroad wanted. So this guy had to package the watermelons the way the government wanted. And when the boat left port, he would send an army of employees to unpack and repack. Okay, so it's nuts. Okay, so this is all gone. This is all gone. But so we have this website where people, and my mail is open, so people write to me directly as well. And then the last methodological way about the how is, sorry, I want to say something else afterwards, which is the other thing about the how is when I look at price differentials. For example, if I see something which has the same price in Argentina than in Europe, okay, I don't have a problem there. Now, if I look at medicines and I see that medicines in Argentina are 5 times more expensive than in Spain, not 5%, 5 times, okay? Then I know I have a problem, okay? Or the automobile. I mean, if to buy a Toyota Yaris, which is an entry-level Toyota, you pay the same thing as a Tesla in the US, you know you have a problem, okay? And so that's another thing. And the last thing I want to mention about the how, because I think it's maybe interesting for you at CDE and for other people is, okay, so we have 700,000 decrees, okay?
Is a decree like a regulation? Or what
I mean, you have laws, then you have
law?
decrees, which is an executive order, and then you have the resolutions, which are kind of a little bit below. So 700,000 decrees. So I issued a rule that by the end of the year, all this thing has to be reviewed and everything that's redundant has to be repealed and everything, okay? So for example, I had to do the job. How do I send? I have 700,000 decrees that I have to send to the ministries, okay? To which minister I sent each decree? that in itself could take me a year, correct? 700,000. So what do we do with my team? I have a bunch of very young guys here. So basically they said each one was going to classify 50 degrees and saying, okay, 50 degrees I would send to this ministry to minister. So 10 of them, so I have in 3 or 4 hours, I have 500 degrees classified. And then I go into ChatGPT and I tell ChatGPT, look, this 500 degrees we classify this way, okay? So now classify the 700,000. And in 3 hours, I had which degrees I had to send to everyone. So now I'm going to take all the degrees which are prior to 1990. I'm going to have the team say which one should be repealed or not. And then I'm going to ask ChatGPT to tell me what decrees prior to of the 630,000, which are prior to 1990, should be repealed or not. So artificial intelligence is kind of helping us speed in the process, and it's a lot of fun. I think Anne for CDE is something quite interesting to explore because nothing. I think it's interesting.
And my understanding is, so that's fascinating. My understanding is that to give you the power to do all of this, the president took a decree to parliament, which empowered you to override all sorts of things 3 weeks or 3 months after coming into office. And then at the end of last year, you took another one to parliament to say there are 160 absurd laws. We want the power to deal with this. Can you just explain how you did that?
No, it's two different things. One is a law which to repeal about 100 laws. We sent that to Congress at the end of last year, and it should be, which I should go to Congress pretty soon to get rid of that. But those are not very relevant laws. This is it's more like a cleaning, no, a cleaning of the legal system. But when we did the basis law, which was the big initial law that Milei sent to Congress, which was discussed for 6 months in Parliament and eventually was passed on the 8th of July, and I agreed with the president that I was going to become minister the 9th of July. Why? Because this law gave us 365 days with a proviso which is called a delegated powers. And for 365 days, Congress said this type of things you can remove even if they're in a law. So we have kind of special powers for a year granted by Congress to eliminate and change certain laws, and we've been using those that delegated powers to the Congress very actively. I have a sign which I'm looking at in my office, which is a counter of the days left. Okay, I want everybody walking into my office of the team know that the time is running up for us. Today I have 100. Today the counter says 125. Okay, so I still have 125 days left. This will allow me from the executive without going to Congress to change some laws. Okay. Now this is for the law layer. The decrees, the solutions, we can work on that unrestricted in a time sense. And after the delegated powers fall, of course, we can, if we want to change something in the law, we can certainly go to Congress and have the discussion and do it. I mean, but really for the next 125 days, we have it a little bit easier in the sense that there are many changes in the law that we can execute without going to Congress. And so the president is using that, and we're using that very, very strongly.
So that's very helpful on the methodology. I mean, there must be some debate on should we remove this law, shouldn't we? Some are absurd, I understand, they're kind of crazy, but is there not sort of heated discussion and debate where people are saying the unions are shouting at you and, I don't know, big business says this and small business says that? How do you deal with
very simple to answer
and dissonance? Yeah.
Look, when I don't know. I don't know if South Africa is like this, okay? But in the case of Argentina, when you read the laws, when I started reading the laws as an economist, so I just using my common sense, okay? And I say, gee, I mean, this is weird because all the laws, it was very clear the imprint that was behind, there was an interest behind every law. So someone had requested that law. This law was providing a privilege for someone, and it was so flagrant, it was so evident, it was so obvious, okay? So actually, when we started reviewing the laws, it was so easy to figure out what had to be done and what not had to be done, okay? Now, of course, why didn't these things happen before? Well, they didn't happen before because you had governments which somehow were the supporters of this system. I've talked of something called a Bermuda Triangle, the Bermuda Triangle, okay? So you know the Bermuda Triangle, you know the triangle, okay? So the Bermuda Triangle is a place where you kind of get lost, okay? You're in a plane blue, okay? So Argentina was stuck in its own Bermuda Triangle. So we were all drowning there, all the Argentines. And what were the supporting what were the supporting edges of the triangle? So you had the union caste, you had the business caste, and you had their political branch, which is the Peronist Party. Look, so the Peronist Party, I say, is the conservative party of Argentina. It's the party of the interest. So it's the interest of the unions and it's the interest of big business. Look, I don't want to extralimitate myself, okay, here, but if you ask me, I think South Africa has its Bermuda Triangle because the Peronist Party, which was a party which was a union party, and it's a party which had very significant social achievements in the 1950s. And from that origin, it had a legitimacy with the people that never faded away, okay? But in its action, it really mutated from defending the people to defending the interest. So it defended the interest of the unions, it defended the interest of the big business, and with which it was imbricated, and the poverty rate reached 57%. I mean, here my comparison with the ANC is absolutely obvious because the ANC is also a union party. It's a party which fought apartheid, so it has a legitimacy from birth, which is unquestionable. But I would say today, is the ANC that party which is defending the people, or is it defending the status quo? And that's why I say the Peronist Party in Argentina is the conservative party of Argentina. It's the party of the established interest. That's why any attempt to break this was really broken, but not because the Peronists were good politicians, because they were feeding their resources from this, both the unions and the business. The business had all these privileges, and the unions had also significant. For example, if I tell you that the unions get 3% of the wage bill of all formal workers in Argentina, you say that has to be a joke, and yet it's in the law, okay? So the law created the system where kind of transfer, and I'll tell you, this morning, now it's in the news, all over the news. I go to the TV now in a few hours, okay, to explain this. In our wage negotiations, you have the unions and you have the representatives of the business community, okay? So these wage negotiations started imposing a sort of like private taxes, like say, okay, the firms in this, so I'm kind of in the metal industry, okay? Okay, so the firms in the metal will have to make a contribution to the Metal Firms Association for training or for this or for that, and then you have to, and the workers have to make a forced contribution to the unions for this or that. Okay, so this morning with the president, we published a decree where we make these forced contributions illegal. Okay, so I mean, but these guys were getting this money from the people, from the business community, from the workers. This money they use to lobby to preserve this interest, okay? So you ask me, I think it's really obvious what had to be done. Of course, you're listening all the time. You're very open to the discussion. when I have the business community come and have a meeting, eventually it's a combination of lobby, they ask for tax reduction, I say, look, it's for me, it's unspoken, okay? You ask me for a tax reduction, this is not my métier, this is not what this ministry is about. And also I say it's immoral because you're asking me for a tax reduction, which means that you want me to charge other people to reduce the taxes to you, okay? So it's immoral, but okay, I'll assume that it has not been spoken, okay? Now, do you have anything about the regulation? Okay, so and then you have to be open that you may make mistakes and that you may have to turn around certain things. And
Have you made some mistakes, and how have you dealt with those? How did you know they were a mistake, and how did you sort of remedy it?
well, you reverse the decision. I'll give you one example. For example, in our initial decree, we basically in Argentina, in order to use your car, you had to do kind of an identification of the car, and then if you wanted someone else, which was not the owner of the car, to use it, you had to do a different card. Okay. So we said no, that we only need one card, okay? And so if you have that initial card, even if you're not the owner, you can drive the car, okay? So it was an attempt to simplify the registration process for cars. And customs, okay, internally there was no issue with that. Actually, many years ago in Argentina, it worked like that. But custom was not willing to let a car, someone which is driving out of Argentina, say to Uruguay or to Brazil, to the beaches in Brazil, were not willing to let the guy go if they were not the owner of the car, okay? And I told the guys in customs, look, this is like you steal a car and then you go to the police station to register. I mean, if you've stolen a car, you're not gonna want to get your fingerprints kind of there in an official office saying this, I have this car, okay? Anyway, but no, I had no way of convincing them. Okay, so basically, what we did is that we have an app where people have their documentation, like their identity card, etc. It's an app on the phone. So we set up a program there so you can actually provide this authorization for a third party to drive, and that we solved the problem. Okay, and so anyway. That would be an example, no? It's not a very dramatic example, but that's an example.
I want to talk about two things before we have to close. The one is, I imagine lots of people would be saying, gee, this is very bold politically. And for a tiny minority party, the president and his administration have kind of taken on the vested interests in the society through this cutting civil service numbers and all sorts of things. So how do you see the politics of this? How have you been able to do this? Is this courageous leadership? I understand you and the president have a real partnership. So when you deregulate something, he backs you with a tweet. And so talk to us a bit about the politics. Is this about, I don't know, courageous sort of and very quick, or what's going on? How have you managed to do this politically?
Well, quickness is of an essence. This is why when we did the first decree, we had everything done. So the first decree was we didn't give time to the lobbies to react, okay? Because they just couldn't believe what we did in the first 10 days. So quickness is a little bit of an essence. I think the president does a tremendous contribution, not only in the clarity of his view, and then by his clarity, I mean, lobbies are reluctant to fight because the president is so clear about what he pretends here. But I give an example. For example, I talk about some regulation that has to go. It's on the newspaper. The president immediately retweets the news. And then the guy who has to lobby against that says, well, what should I do? I mean, the president has already said that he's supporting this. And so I tell the president, it's like, you're going ahead of me, clearing my path. And I can move fast because you're ahead of me, kind of telling everybody we're moving ahead in this agenda, so you should not attempt to stop it. So, but I think the main thing is that is his popularity, no? And I think his popularity is because people were fed up, you know? I mean, listen, 57% poverty, our kids live in high inflation, high taxes. You get nothing out of it. You can't send your people, a large fraction of the population doesn't send their kid to public education. They send them to private education. They can't go to the public hospitals. They go to the private hospitals. So you're paying for all these things. You're getting nothing in exchange for any of that. So said, at least we needed someone, you know, to say, let's tackle all these things. So we've been robbed for 50 years, and we've kind of fallen in poverty out of this political class and all this establishment and all this status quo basically living out of us. And the president has been very, very straightforward. He said things in the campaign that, and people said, I want to try this, you know, and he's kept up his word, and he believes very strongly in these things, and so his popularity has increased, not decreased, during this mandate. Correct. So we're actually kind of very optimistic about our elections, which are in October, and actually it's pretty much a miracle. I mean that with only 10% of parliamentary representation, we've been able to pull through the significant laws that we've been able to. Of course, we have some very significant allies in Congress, which are parties which are more aligned with our view, but still it's pretty remarkable.
So what, I was going to ask you what your genuine critics might say about how you're going about all of this and your approach to a sort of libertarian approach, but maybe I should rephrase it with, what are the things that keep you up at night? What worries you? You know, what could derail this remarkable turnaround for the country in such a short time? What
I'll
should
tell
one
you.
look for?
I'll tell you what keeps me at night, even though at night it's better to sleep, you know, because you need to have a good strength for the following day. But I think that if fiscal surplus consolidates, and I'm definitely sure that will be the case because the president has asked us to accelerate the reduction of the state at the time that the economy is recovering. So tax collection is going up as a result of the recovery. So except that a fiscal surplus is going to be used to reduce taxes to the extent that he and the finance minister feel that it's confident and safe to do so, without risking the fiscal surplus. So I think that if the government has that fiscal strength, it's like a ship that you cannot torpedo. Okay, the ship may go faster, may be lower. I may do my job better or worse. The Minister of Health may do his job better or worse. The Minister of Human Capital may do her job better or worse, but the boat is unsinkable, okay, because it's going to be sitting on a very solid macro foundation. But I told you the Bermuda Triangle, okay? And the Bermuda Triangle has these three actors, has the unions, has the business, and has the Peronist Party. And I would say that their economic power is pretty much unscathed yet.
Okay.
And now these guys are not being very aggressive because the president has more than 50%, 55%, 60% popularity rates. The economy is booming. The inflation is coming down. They realize that now is not the moment to fight this reform process. But that doesn't mean that they don't want to fight the reform process, that they're not waiting for the moment to fight the reform process, okay? So my task is to somehow weaken their economic power so that they're not able to do that. For example, the resolution that we issued today, where these guys were receiving this they were requiring from the people they were representing this sort of private taxes, and now they're gone, it weakens them as a lobbying factor, okay? I don't know if I'm making myself more or less clear. And I think that process, that's kind of, so when I think about the reforms, it's like two layers. You have the economist layer, no? I want this market to work better and there to be more competition. But then there's a second layer with when you provide competition, you reduce the rents. And the rents that you're reducing are weakening a lobbying group which was trying to keep the market closed to sustain those rents. And so all the regulations have like a two dimensions. They have the economic dimension and the political dimension. Okay, and I think we're moving at a good speed, but these guys are just there, powerful. The forces of kind of the restoration of the old conservative order. It's like, it's like you did the French Revolution and the monarchists were there, waiting for the moment. They're
So
still
that's what Chainsaw 2 is all about. It's trying to reduce the power of the vested interests.
not really. Not really. The chainsaw is more about the government. It's more about reducing government expense. The chainsaw is more kind of internal to the government, and the deregulation is more it's more what really kind of goes against these pockets of money, which the counter reformists.
So you're hoping that the people who benefit from your reforms are going to, in a sense, remain loyal to the president and what he's trying to do and outweigh the vested interests in the status quo.
It doesn't matter how much if the people support or not. I'll give you an example. When I was in the government of Macri, which was the previous kind of much more timid attempt to reform, Macri won his first midterm elections very well, very significantly. I was president of the central bank. Inflation had come down, the economy was booming. After he won the first term election, the midterm election, this interest group said, this guy is dangerous because this guy is doing well and it's dangerous. And then they decided it was the moment to attack. And the economy was doing very well, okay? Inflation was down, the economy was booming, wages in real terms. And they attacked the guy, the unions on one side, the business community attacked me as president of the central bank, trying to force a change in monetary policy. And 6 months later, there was nothing left of the government of Macri. In spite of the political support, he has just come from winning the election. So here, for me, the issue is not so much what people think, but whether these forces of conservatism, the reactionary forces of the old order, have their economic ability to fight against the government. And if they do, they can wreak havoc, okay? Because the unions can if they have money, they can put a lot of people on the streets, you name it, okay? So anyway, so I think it's more about the interest groups and not so much about the public support. Okay. Now, of course, it is true that this public support being so strong, the interest groups are a little bit at bay. That 100% helps. Definitely, that helps. But my experience from Macri is that even if they get to the point that now they have to fight, they're going to fight regardless of the public opinion. And then, you start having roadblocks, having tires being burnt in the streets, and then you create a sense of chaos, and then the government has to deal with that. Okay. So for me, the way to avoid that is to make sure that they don't have the economic resources to pull that kind of challenge to the reforms.
Right. Well, this has been fascinating. It's a lesson in reform and in what's happening in Argentina. Thank you so much, Federico, for a really fascinating hour. Thank you for giving us the time. And this is a remarkable story of progress, and hopefully the reformists can keep going and can persevere. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our time, and great to spend an hour with you.
My pleasure, and all the best to you and all the team at CDE, okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much for listening today, everybody. And we're now closing the webinar. Thanks.